Welcome back to Wartime Heroes. This channel isn't about fairy tales or Hollywood endings. It's about real flesh and blood Marines who faced impossible odds and chose to stand when everything inside them screamed to run. Tonight's story isn't just about courage. It's about a man who redefined what it means to be a Marine. A man who earned the Medal of Honor not once, but twice. The only Marine in history to achieve this honor. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. If you respect the kind of sacrifice we're about to explore, make sure you stay until the end because Daniel Daly's journey will change how you see heroism forever. Most people think heroes are born. That somewhere in their DNA lies some special code that makes them fearless. But Daniel Joseph Daly wasn't born a hero. He was born in 1873 in Glen Cove, New York, the son of Irish immigrants who worked with their hands and believed in earning what you got. His father was a carpenter. His mother took in washing. They had nothing but sweat, faith, and the kind of stubborn pride that refuses to quit. Young Daniel was small for his age, quiet, the kind of kid who got picked on but never backed down. He learned early that size didn't matter. Heart did. At 17, most boys were thinking about girls or finding steady work. Daniel was thinking about something bigger. He walked into the Marine recruiting station in Manhattan on January 10, 1899. The recruiter looked him up and down, 5 foot 6 inches, 135 pounds, soaking wet. The man almost laughed. "You sure about this, son?" Marines need to be tough. Daniel didn't flinch. He looked the recruiter straight in the eye and said simply, "I'm ready." What that recruiter couldn't see was what lived inside that small frame. Pure determination forged in the streets of Glen Cove, tempered by years of proving himself to bigger, stronger men. Boot camp at Paris Island was hell designed to break men. The drill instructors screamed until their voices cracked. They pushed recruits past exhaustion, past pain, past the point where most men quit. Daniel never quit. When others collapsed during 20-mile marches in full gear, he kept walking. When the heat index hit 110 degrees and Marines dropped like flies, he stayed standing. Not because it was easy, because it mattered. The other recruits started watching him. This quiet kid from New York who never complained, never gave up, never asked for special treatment. By the time graduation came, Daniel Daly wasn't the biggest Marine in his class. He wasn't the loudest or the strongest, but he was something else entirely. He was reliable. When the smoke cleared and the chaos settled, Daniel Daly was still there, still fighting, still standing. His drill instructors saw it. His fellow Marines saw it. And soon, the world would see it too. Fresh out of boot camp, Private Daly was shipped to China. The year was 1900. The Boxer Rebellion was tearing the country apart. Foreign diplomats were trapped in Beijing, surrounded by thousands of Chinese fighters who wanted all foreigners dead. The international settlement was under siege. Food was running low. Ammunition was scarce. Hope was dying with each passing day. And into this nightmare walked Daniel Daly and the rest of the Marine contingent, tasked with one impossible mission: hold the wall, no matter what. The wall around the legation quarter wasn't much. Ancient stone and brick, maybe 12 feet high in some places, crumbling in others. It was all that stood between the diplomats, their families, and certain death. The Boxers attacked day and night, thousands of them armed with rifles, swords, torches. They came in waves, screaming, firing, throwing everything they had at that thin line of Marines holding the perimeter. Daniel was assigned to the most dangerous section, a stretch of wall that had been partially destroyed by artillery fire. It was a gap that the enemy targeted relentlessly because they knew if they broke through there, the entire compound would fall. For 55 days and nights, Daniel Daly held that position. 55 days of constant gunfire, of watching friends die, of going without sleep, without proper food, without relief. But it was on one particular night that Daniel Daly first showed the world who he really was. The Boxers had been quiet for hours. Too quiet. In war, silence is often more terrifying than gunfire because it means something is coming. Daniel crouched behind the damaged wall, rifle ready, eyes scanning the darkness. The other Marines were exhausted, some nodding off at their posts. Not Daniel. Something in his gut told him to stay alert. Then he saw them. Moving shadows in the moonlight, dozens of Boxers creeping toward the wall, carrying ladders, ropes, weapons. They thought they could scale the damaged section in silence, get inside the compound, and slaughter everyone while they slept. They were wrong. Daniel didn't shout, he didn't panic. He took careful aim and fired. One shot, one Boxer fell. Then chaos erupted. The enemy charged. Daniel worked his bolt-action rifle like a machine, firing, cycling, firing again. But they kept coming. More than he could count. They reached the wall. Ladders went up. Ropes flew over the top. And Daniel Daly was the only thing standing between them and the families sleeping just yards away. He grabbed his bayonet, fixed it to his rifle, and made a choice that would echo through Marine Corps history. Instead of falling back, instead of calling for help, instead of waiting for reinforcements that might never come, Daniel Daly climbed up on that broken wall and fought them hand to hand. One man against dozens. Bayonet thrust, rifle butt, boot, fist, whatever it took. The other Marines heard the commotion and came running. What they found was Daniel Daly, blood streaming down his face, uniform torn, still fighting, still holding the line. Bodies of enemy fighters lay scattered around the base of the wall. The attack had been stopped. The compound was safe. And standing in the middle of it all, barely breathing but still standing, was this quiet kid from Glen Cove who had just saved hundreds of lives. Word of what happened that night spread through the Marine detachment, then to the other international forces, then back to the United States. When the siege finally ended and the Marines returned home, Daniel Daly found himself standing before senior officers, receiving the Medal of Honor for his actions that night in Beijing. The citation read gallant conduct during the battle, but those two words didn't capture what really happened. They didn't describe the moment when one man chose to stand against impossible odds. They didn't explain the kind of courage that turns ordinary people into legends. But for Daniel Daly, that medal wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning. Because the Marine Corps had bigger plans for their quiet hero from New York. Plans that would take him to the jungles of Haiti, to trenches in France, to places where the only thing standing between civilization and chaos was a handful of Marines who refused to break. Daniel pinned that, He didn't meddle to his uniform and kept serving to seek glory or fame or recognition. He just did his job. Day after day, mission after mission, always reliable, always ready, always there when it mattered most. What he didn't know was that his greatest test was still coming, a test that would prove once and for all that heroes aren't born from privilege or power or special gifts. They're forged in the fire of impossible choices, shaped by the decision to stand when everyone else runs, defined by the willingness to pay any price to protect what matters. The Marine Corps was about to send Daniel Daly to Haiti, and in that tropical hell, surrounded by revolution and violence, he would face a moment that would cement his place in military history forever. Haiti in 1915 was a cauldron of revolution and bloodshed. The country had been torn apart by political upheaval, with different factions fighting for control while foreign interests circled like vultures. American businesses had investments to protect. American citizens needed evacuation. And when diplomacy failed, when the situation spiraled beyond control, the call went out for Marines. Daniel Daly, now a seasoned gunnery sergeant, landed with the expeditionary force at Port-au-Prince. The heat hit like a wall, thick and suffocating. The air reeked of smoke, sweat, and something else, something that Marines who'd seen combat recognized instantly: death. The city was chaos. Gunfire echoed through narrow streets, bodies lay where they'd fallen, and in the middle of it all, small detachments of Marines tried to restore order with nothing but discipline and firepower. Daly's unit was assigned to Fort Dipity, a crumbling fortress outside the capital. It wasn't much of a fort by American standards. Thick stone walls, yes, but ancient, cracked, full of blind spots that any enemy could exploit. The position overlooked a strategic river crossing, which made it valuable, but it also made it a target. Intelligence reports suggested that rebel forces, hundreds of them, were massing in the jungle. Their objective was simple: take the fort, kill the Marines, send a message that foreign soldiers weren't welcome in Haiti. On the night of October 24th, 1915, that message was about to be delivered. Daly had positioned his men around the perimeter, but he was worried. His force was tiny. 35 Marines against unknown numbers of enemy fighters who knew the terrain, who could move through that jungle like ghosts. The rebels had the advantage of numbers, local knowledge, and desperation. All the Marines had was training, discipline, and Daniel Daly. The attack began at 0200 hours. Not with a charge or a battle cry, but with silence. Daly was making his rounds, checking on his men, when he noticed something wrong. The jungle sounds had stopped. No insects, no night birds, nothing. In combat, that kind of silence meant only one thing: you were surrounded. The first muzzle flashes lit up. The darkness shots came from 3 directions simultaneously. Like deadly fireworks. The rebels had crept close enough to see the whites of Marine eyes, close enough to count the buttons on their uniforms. This wasn't going to be a siege. This was going to be a slaughter, unless someone did something extraordinary. Daly dropped behind cover and assessed the situation. His Marines were spread thin along the walls, returning fire as best they could, but they were outnumbered at least 10 to 1. The enemy had them surrounded and was closing in. In minutes, maybe less, rebel fighters would be over the walls and inside the fort. Standard procedure would be to consolidate forces, fall back to a defensible position, call for reinforcements. But there was no fallback position, no reinforcements were coming, and Daniel Daly didn't follow standard procedure. He grabbed his rifle, checked his ammunition, and made a decision that defied every tactical manual ever written. Instead of waiting for the enemy to come to him, he was going to take the fight to them. Alone. In the dark. Against overwhelming odds. The other Marines thought he'd lost his mind when he vaulted over the wall and disappeared into the night. What they didn't understand was that Daniel Daly had found his calling. Moving through hostile territory at night requires skills most men don't possess. You have to think like a predator and move like a ghost. Every step has to be calculated, every breath controlled. One mistake, one snapped branch or kicked stone, and you're dead. Daly had learned these skills through years of combat, but more than that, he had something most soldiers lack. Absolute confidence in his own abilities. He worked his way around the enemy positions using darkness as his ally. The rebels had concentrated their forces for the assault, which meant they'd left gaps in their lines, gaps that a single determined Marine could exploit. Daly found the first group of fighters huddled behind fallen logs, planning their next move. They never saw him coming. 3 quick shots. 3 rebels down. Before the others could react, Daly was gone, melting back into the shadows. The enemy started shouting, confused, trying to figure out where the shots had come from. Some thought they were taking friendly fire. Others believed there were Marine reinforcements in the jungle. The truth was worse than either of those possibilities. There was one Marine out there, and he was hunting them. For the next 2 hours, Daniel Daly waged a one-man war against an entire rebel force. He hit them from different angles, different positions, always moving, always striking where they least expected. He used every trick he'd learned in China, every lesson from years of combat. But most of all, he used something that can't be taught in any manual. Pure, relentless determination. The psychological effect was devastating. The rebels began to panic. Their coordinated attack fell apart as units broke off to chase shadows in the jungle. Some started retreating, convinced they were facing a much larger force. Others fired at anything that moved, including each other. What had started as a disciplined assault became a confused rout, all because one Marine refused to accept defeat. Back at the fort, Daly's men listened to the chaos erupting around them. Gunfire echoed from every direction. Shouts in Creole mixed with screams of pain and confusion. They had no idea where their gunnery sergeant was or if he was even still alive. All they could do was hold their positions and wait. Wait and hope that Daniel Daly would somehow find a way to save them all. As dawn approached, the jungle fell quiet again. But this time, it was the silence of victory, not the silence before an attack. The surviving rebels had melted away into the wilderness, their assault broken, their confidence shattered. And walking out of the morning mist, rifle slung over his shoulder, uniform torn but spirit unbroken, came Daniel Daly. He climbed back over the wall like he'd just been out for a morning stroll. His men gathered around him, questions tumbling over each other. How many were there? How did you survive? What happened out there? Daly just shrugged and started cleaning his rifle. He'd done his job. Nothing more needed to be said. But word of that night spread through the Marine Corps like wildfire. One man had broken an entire enemy assault. One Marine had saved a strategic position against impossible odds. And when the official reports reached Washington, the brass knew they were looking at something special. Something that deserved recognition at the highest level. For the second time in his career, Daniel Daly found himself standing at attention while a senior officer read from a citation. The words were formal, military language that tried to capture the extraordinary in bureaucratic terms. But everyone present understood what they were really witnessing. They were watching a man receive his second Medal of Honor, the first Marine in history to earn the nation's highest military decoration twice. 2 Medals of Honor should have been enough, should have been the end of the story. Should have earned Daniel Daly a quiet retirement, a pension, maybe a desk job somewhere safe. But heroes don't get to choose when their service ends. And the world wasn't done testing Daniel Daly's resolve. The year was 1918. World War I had been raging across Europe for 4 years. Millions were dead. Entire nations bled white. The Germans had launched their final desperate offensive, throwing everything they had at the Allied lines. American forces were arriving in France by the thousands, fresh-faced boys who'd never seen real combat, never smelled cordite and death mixed together in the morning air. Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Daly, now 45 years old, stepped off the transport ship at Brest with the 5th Marine Regiment. Around him, young Marines joked nervously, trying to hide their fear behind bravado. They'd heard stories about the Western Front, about no man's land, about trenches that ran with blood and mud. But hearing stories and living them are 2 different things entirely. That's the story of Daniel Daly, a carpenter's son from Glen Cove who proved that heroism isn't about size or strength or being born special. It's about standing when others fall. It's about choosing duty over safety, brothers over self. 2 Medals of Honor, countless lives saved, and a legacy that still inspires Marines today. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories of American heroes, because legends like Daniel Daly deserve to be remembered.